And I think I just started recording it. Hi everyone. My name is Maggie Smith. I'm a coordinator with CASA. I'm sure all of you know that, but we have Brooke Foley with us, who is the mental health clinician with the juvenile court. She's a part of the SPARC program, and she has been super awesome and is willing to take time out of her day to tell us about SPARC. So I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you because you have all the interesting information.
Hey everybody, I'm Brooke Foley. Yes, I'm the mental health clinician at juvenile court, but I also coordinate the SPARC program, which many of you have probably heard of, but may wonder what in the world does that word mean and who is involved with it. So we're going to talk a little bit about the program, what the criteria is, and just overall what the program looks like. And I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, so bear with me. But just to give you guys some background into the SPARC program, we actually, I would say it's a very complex program. What we do is, I feel like we deal with some of the most difficult cases in juvenile court, but that's just me, I'm biased. But at the same time, some of the most rewarding cases in juvenile court. So my background is mainly in children's mental health, as well as I actually started my career as an intern with family treatment court. So if you guys are familiar with FTC, that is where I started out, actually the year that it was started in 2008. And I have in some way, shape or form maintained contact with juvenile court since that time, either through dependency or through delinquency, and doing individual therapy and services for these families. So I have been with juvenile court for about 5.5 years now, and the SPARC program has really, even though it's only about half of my job, it's really my passion. And I love this court, I love these families, and I love our team, which is really a collaboration of some really awesome people. So I was telling Maggie, I'm not sure who all is on, but as we go, I wanted to give just some basic information about juvenile court in general and the types of referrals we get, so that we can then break it down to who's going to be appropriate for SPARC. And if I bore you guys to tears, just, give me raise your hand or something, and I'll move on. But and if you have questions as we go, please feel free to put them in the chat box. And Maggie, I don't know if you want to kind of let me know whenever somebody has a question.
Yeah,
or
absolutely. I'll field all of that, so don't worry about it.
Awesome. Okay. Well, we're going to jump in a little bit and talk about the SPARC program. So for those of you who are brand new to the system, I just wanted to give a brief overview of the types of referrals we see at juvenile court. We certainly see the dependency, which most of you are involved in those cases. Delinquency, we see the chins, and we see the traffic offenses. So all of this makes up for a very interesting day at juvenile court, because we tend to see all of these pretty much at the same time, could sometimes be in the same courtroom at the same time, making our cases pretty complicated sometimes. But just to go through, and again, this is kind of basic, just to go through the actual dependency. This certainly is a case where a child does not have parental care, subsistence, education, or other care as necessary for one's physical, mental, or emotional health or morals. These are all of our defects cases. So I'm sure most of you are familiar with defects and the procedures and protocols that go along with that. And I'm going to circle back around to that in just a few minutes.
You actually have your first question. Do you mind spelling out and defining what chins is?
Oh, it's coming up. So I'm definitely going to explain that. So thanks for asking. Yes. The delinquency cases, these are charges that pretty much, if it was committed by an adult, would be a crime. We don't use the words criminal. We don't use the words found guilty. All of this, we definitely have our own language and lingo when we're talking about juvenile offenders, basically because we don't want them to take that on as their identity whenever they're moving up in age, and they don't want to we don't want them to automatically feel like they're going to be in the system. And a lot of times that's in history, that's kind of what we did. We made that their identity, and we locked them up. So as part of our initiatives to branch out and keep kids out of detention, we have started coming up with these new programs and ideas. So Yes, CHINS is a child in need of services. So perfect timing. CHINS is, I will say, outside of SPARC, CHINS are the most difficult cases to deal with in juvenile court. We have one specific unit for the CHINS cases. And basically, these are the cases that have the highest instances of mental health. They have typically the lowest instances of legal issues. So it's kind of, you want to make sure that we get them into services, but we don't want to lock them up because then they may be exposed to more delinquency and, learn new tricks of the trade. We don't want them to do that. But these are typically the more traumatized kids or those with more intensive mental health diagnoses. So the truancy, runaways, ungovernables, curfew violations, possession of alcohol by a minor, possession of tobacco by a minor, is pretty much anything that if they were over the age of 18 or 21 would not be a crime. So these referrals actually can come from anywhere in the community. It can come from school, it can come from a parent, it can come from a neighbor across the street who sees some things going on. It could be from CASA. It could be really from anybody who has firsthand knowledge of ungovernable behavior that may just indicate they need some help. So a person can actually come to the court and file a CHINS petition. And what typically happens after that is you would be set up to meet with a CHINS probation officer to talk about the process and see if that's a good fit. But CHINS really is fairly new in the juvenile code. I think it started in 2013. But the interesting part about CHINS is every single county does it differently. So we tend to work hand in hand with our probation officers and DFACs. So really, I hope that answers your question, but really it's any child who, if they were over the age of 18, would not have committed a crime. All right, so accountability courts. Accountability courts have been around for a long time, and most people are familiar with the adult accountability courts. Not everybody is familiar with our juvenile accountability court, but in Chatham County, we do have drug court, which is in Superior Court. We have DUI court, we have veterans court, we have mental health court, family treatment court, which is in juvenile court, but it's actually for adults who are involved in the DFAC system. And then we have SPARC. So SPARC is our only juvenile court, quote unquote, juvenile court, accountability court. And so an accountability court is really a fancy way of saying that we have structure and we have phases to help people graduate and meet their goals. So we are actually required to report to the state. We do a lot of data gathering to identify what the diagnoses are we're seeing, what are some of the patterns we're seeing. And overall, all of this information is compiled in a big database where the powers that be and all the great minds come together and identify what is going to be the best way to spend our money in the state. Is this worth it? Or do we need to put money somewhere else? So what the research shows is that the accountability courts actually are showing some pretty amazing alternatives to incarceration or detention. So what the heck is SPARC? Though it is an accountability court, we're kind of in a zone of our own. So in the state of Georgia, we are one of 4 juvenile mental health courts. We are actually the first that started in 2009. Our current probation officer, his name is Kenneth Williams. Some of you may be familiar. He actually helped start the program. He is the only person who has been here since the very beginning, and he's hung in there. Judge Beam was 100% the person who founded SPARC. He was, actually at that time it was called Juvenile Mental Health Court. When they started the court, it was mainly just to have a team of people who are all going to do a round table to keep people on track to meet their goals. What they had noticed is a lot of the kids with mental health diagnoses, they ended up in detention and actually getting worse rather than getting the treatment that they need to be productive in the community. So overall, when they first started, they weren't really sure how they were going to structure it, but they had a goal in mind, and it has literally evolved every single year. And like I said, I've been involved with it for about 5 years now, going on 6. And every year we're coming up with new things, new ideas, new connections, really to try and help our youth who are diagnosed with mental health disorders, help them succeed in just having partners in the community to help them through it, as well as their families. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But just to give you a background as to why we changed the name, we changed it about 3 years ago, maybe going on 4. So what we started to find out, or what I noticed when I was doing assessments on kids, is I would talk to them about juvenile mental health court. And most of the time it was more the parents rather than the kids who were saying, no, we're not doing anything called mental health, nothing. Mental health, you know, the stigma it was just too much for a lot of the families. So that's where we came up with SPARC, which stands for, did I not even put it in here? It is Specialized Probation and Rehabilitation Court. So that pretty much describes what our court is specialized because we have one probation officer specially trained to deal with our population, which is awesome. And our goal is to sometimes not even rehabilitate, is habilitation, to treat children according to their mental health diagnoses, as well as help them increase their coping skills to deal with that in everyday life. See, there we go. So, one moment. In regards to SPARC probation versus traditional probation, we do talk a lot about traditional probation and what that would look like with the families. So, just for example, when we first get a referral for SPARC, and that could come from really anywhere within the court, when I get a referral, I'll look through it to make sure they meet our criteria, which I'll go over in a second. But I mainly want to make sure that the parents understand the difference between what is traditional probation and what is SPARC probation. So with traditional probation, they tend to have one single probation officer who may or may not see them every month. They'll usually call them once a month. They have very limited contact. They don't always go into the community and see them face to face, especially right now with COVID and everything going on. But they only hold review hearings when there's been a violation or there is something that needs to be addressed in regards to a court order. They have limited access to services for the family as a whole. And I say limited access as in just the general population. So most of our families involved in SPARC, or involved in juvenile court, excuse me, have some sort of state benefits, whether it's Medicaid, AmeriGroup, CMOs, WellCare, CareSource. So they have access to services, but they don't get some of the specialized attention that they would otherwise through SPARC. Traditional probation is also involuntary and of course court ordered. So depending on the judge, all of the probation requirements are set forth. So in SPARC, one thing that some of the parents will not tell you that they signed up for this, but they did. Our requirement is that they actually have to volunteer for the program. So we do have a specialized mental health probation officer. Again, that's Mr. Williams. His background, he actually worked at Coastal Harbor for a while. He's worked as a mental health case manager. And then as he worked for the SIP program, which was our intensive probation. And then he worked his way into the SPARC program. And it just seemed like a good fit for him. If any of you have met him or haven't met him, he's this big guy, but he is a teddy bear and he understands mental health. And our kids really do respond well to him. But he can be intimidating if he needs to be, but usually not. We have weekly to monthly hearings to stay updated. We have very frequent staffings to go over all of our cases. We do have grant funding, like I said, and then community partnerships for stopgaps. For example, Jess Matthewson is one of our team members. She is over the youth to adult program with Gateway, and she received a grant from DBHDD, Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, to actually help us with some of the services with our families. So she was supplying for kids who didn't have school supplies, she'll buy school supplies for them. If they didn't have transportation to counseling, she would help with that. If the parents were struggling with groceries, she would help with that. She would help alleviate with a lot of the little details that a lot of times get overlooked when it comes to insurance and traditional services. So our hope is to keep defects out of the picture. That doesn't always happen, but she does definitely help with a lot of those services that otherwise people may not be able to access. Again, it's voluntary only. The parent must consent. It's not voluntary for the child. Unfortunately, you know, they want to get a say-so. Sometimes they buy into it and they're really excited about it. Other times, not so much, but we try to win them over. And again, a lot of thorough documentation and reporting to the state. This is just really just an overview of our delinquent referrals. This was in 2018 and 17. We don't have any for 2019 because COVID. So they haven't completed all of those reports yet to just show you some of our stats. These are just delinquent referrals by age, race, and gender during those times. When looking at our SPARC referrals, it tends to be a little different. We tend to have about half and half female to male. The majority of our population is African American, but we have had a lot more diversity, I'd say, in the last 2 years, just in our population as a whole. So you'll see Black males make up the majority of juvenile court referrals, but our mental health court services actually is a little more diverse. So I just wanted to point that out there. So this is the admission criteria just for SPARC, and I will talk a little bit more about the diagnoses and what those may mean. So a youth has to have a primary diagnosis of a mood disorder within the last year. Primary meaning that is the one diagnosis that's really driving behavior or driving the delinquent or criminal thinking, as we would call it. For example, if we have a child with obsessive compulsive disorder and they take things, they shoplift on a regular basis. Maybe if they're medicated or they get the correct services, they'll be less impulsive. If we have a child who has disruptive mood dysregulation disorder, it's one of our very common diagnoses, they may be more prone to fight or be more prone to violence. So when we see that if those mental health symptoms are alleviated, they may be successful and not be delinquent. Those are the cases that we tend to want to take into SPARC. The youth must have a predispositional risk assessment of 2 or higher. For those of you who aren't familiar with the PDRA, it's really a tool used that came from DJJ that's to identify the kids who are at higher risk to recidivate or reoffend. So it looks at things like family support, access to drugs and alcohol, access to delinquent peers, school attendance, just that it is supposed to give an overview of what the child's risk looks like. We tend to take the medium to high risk kids just because they're the ones who are going to need the most help. For a lot of kids, SPARC is the last stop before being committed to the Department of Juvenile Justice, and we're trying to prevent that. So it was created, and Judge Colbert, who is now over our program, or that's another new development, who was over our program for almost 7 years, she really wanted to focus on those high-risk kids to do everything in our power to keep them out of DJJ custody. Charges must be delinquent, so we don't take kids who only have CHINS charges. We don't take kids who are only involved with defects. They have to have a delinquent charge, but what tends to happen is they'll have a delinquent charge, and then they'll have a CHINS charge, and then they'll have a defects case, so we get them all in the mix, but they have to have that delinquent charge. The guardian of the child has to be willing and able to comply with the requirements of the program. We have had some parents who were referred, but they struggled a lot with transportation, or they struggled physically and had a lot of health ailments. Because our court can be somewhat demanding as far as how many court hearings we have, we just try to be cognizant of that, because we certainly don't want to set anybody up to be unsuccessful in the program. With COVID, that has been one of the good things that's come out of it, is you don't have to come out to the court every week to have our hearings. You can actually just attend through WebEx, and we can send your incentive in the mail, or if you get a sanction, Mr. Williams will just come straight to your house. So we also want to make sure that the youth can safely, that's supposed to be safely, maintained in the community. We have had some kids who had some pretty extensive legal histories. We try to be cognizant of the kids who are acting out sexually, or kids who are setting fires. We want to make sure that they are safe, as well as the people around them. So if those are concerns, most likely they're going to need some type of stabilization, but we also just want to make sure that if they need inpatient or residential, that they're getting that as well. Anybody can refer. I think I mentioned that earlier. Most of the time people think it has to come directly from a judge or a probation officer. It really doesn't. Just to give you a little background into how we screen at juvenile court, whenever we have a child come through who has a history of mental health or a history of grief, loss, trauma, the probation officer will often refer them to me. And what I do is just a brief general assessment. It's called a BPS, the biopsychosocial assessment. And that's where I gather information from the family and the child just about their history, to identify if there are any gaps or anything that needs to be addressed. And sometimes just to get to know the kid off paper, to get to know what they like, what they don't like, and what may or may not work for them as far as working in the system. Once I do those assessments, that a lot of times will tell me who's gonna maybe work best with our population in SPARC. Sometimes the referrals will come from the bench. At that time, we're gonna go ahead and screen them, but it's not always a good fit. So they cannot be ordered in if the team believes that they're not a good fit. So what will happen is, once I get a referral, we'll actually meet with them as the entire team. We'll sit around with the family, with the child and the parent. And it's we try to keep it casual. We don't wanna make it intimidating. We don't meet in the courtroom, but we just wanna make it a casual conversation as to what are the issues that need to be addressed? What can we do to help you? And is this something you're willing to do? Every once in a while, we'll get a family that is initially very resistant to the program, but if the problems persist with their family or with their child, sometimes they will come back and just say, hey, is this still an option? And it always is. We have kids who don't even have open charges who have been referred to us, and we will take them if we feel like it's a good move. Our max is about 15 kids at a time. So, and if we take a child, just for example, if we take a child who has a mental health disorder into SPARC and they have a sibling involved with the system or involved with juvenile court, we will also take that sibling into our program. And that's mainly just for continuity of care, continuity of probation, and so that the family doesn't have to work with multiple probation officers. So the mood disorders as the primary diagnosis. So the research shows that those youth and adults with mood disorders as the primary diagnosis are more likely to work better with a system of rewards and incentives, or incentives and sanctions, excuse me. So if their primary diagnosis is one of these: bipolar, depressive disorders, anxiety disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, trauma and stress related disorders like PTSD, cyclothymia, most likely they will be appropriate if that behavior is driven by their mental health. Does that make sense? Hope. Are there any questions or anything popping up, Maggie?
There was one question, but you might get to it, and it was how many kids are in SPARC right now?
All right, I'm gonna get there.
Okay.
All right, so our families don't come with just one mental health disorder. They come with all types of issues and things that we try to help problem solve. Most of the time, they don't just have one diagnosis. They have an initial diagnosis of a mood disorder, but then they also have ADHD, or they may have symptoms of psychosis. They may have developmental delays, meaning they need more additional help as far as education goes. Sometimes they don't even have these diagnoses because they weren't tested appropriately. For example, autism testing is hard to come by these days. There aren't enough providers. So that may be something that we try to get diagnosed or help with. I would say 100% of our families that we get have some history of trauma, whether it's firsthand for the child, firsthand for the parent, previous systems involvement, history of dependency. There's always added baggage that goes along with it's not just the child's behavior, but a lot of times it's very generational, and there's just a lot of overwhelming things to deal with. Most of our kids come from single parent households, which certainly there's nothing wrong with a single parent household, but they come from single parents who don't have a lot of support outside of the system. So usually they do have a history of being involved with defects, or they do have a history of their own legal issues. And coming into our courtroom or signing up for a program where you're required to come to court on a regular basis, that can in itself be traumatic. So we try to be cognizant of that and try not to make it so intimidating to where they don't trust us and don't feel like we're there to help them. So these are certainly some of the factors involved: the lack of parental guidance, along with psychiatric illness, along with media exposure, insecurity, peer pressure. All of this wrapped up together is pretty much, it says juvenile delinquency, but that's pretty much what we see on a daily basis. So how is our program managed? Sometimes we have to do some deep breathing exercises, and we have to kind of calm ourselves down before court, depending on what's going on. But we work really well as a team, and I feel like our communication is one of the primary things that keeps us going. We have staffings every week. Even if we don't have court, we have meetings to go over our cases. Our probation or inner staff, I would say, that includes me, our case manager, our PO, as well as our supervisor. All of that, all of those meet on Tuesdays, which actually I just finished up that meeting before I met with you guys. We go over our cases. And then on Thursdays, we meet with that team as well as all of our attorneys and our judge. We do have a smaller caseload for specialized probation. The max is 15, and that's just based on our grant. It's also based on what Mr. Williams is willing to take. So anything over 15 for SPARC is really a heavy caseload. We've even considered making that number smaller or bringing on another probation officer, just because they can be very demanding. And one thing that we have to ensure with these families is that they understand the importance of medication. They understand the importance of keeping appointments. So that's why we have so many team members to help us out with all of that. We have community partners, I mentioned that. And then of course we take a trauma-informed approach when talking about how we're gonna treat a family. So we actually will go back into the family history, see what we can find out from the family, going back through the assessments. And if, for example, if there's a family member who has a bad history of interaction with males, we have made accommodations to have a female with Mr. Williams at all times to ensure they feel safe. We want to make sure that if we're going into their home, we don't want to be intimidating. We don't want to invade their space, because a lot of times that's their only safe space. We want to maybe stay outside. So we really try to treat every family differently depending on what their needs are. And Mr. Williams is very respectful of that. So just to talk a little bit about the program structure, our overall program is really meant to be about 12 to 18 months. We do have kids who stay with us longer depending on the circumstances, and we've had some graduate in 6 months. It just depends on the level of their needs and the willingness of the families to partner with us. Phase 1 is the orientation phase, and really this is more of the get to know you phase, so that we can all be on the same page. They at least have 3 to 4 court hearings a month, which seems like a lot, and it can be. We have court every Thursday for SPARC. They would have at least 2 contacts with a specialized probation officer every week. A lot of that is virtual now, but he is also going into the homes and making contacts. Connections with services, certainly we want to make sure they're in the right level of care. And we partner with community services to provide most of our kids' treatment. Every once in a while we'll use private providers, but for the most part, our kids are at a high level of need. They need the intensive family intervention services, or they need the wraparound services that are really going to be intensive in helping them through this process. So the treatment providers are always included in our team meetings too. We require families to fill out medication logs, and I'm not going to lie, they hate them. They are frustrating. And a lot of our parents take offense saying, I know how to give my kid meds. That's not the point. It's for our information. So if your child refuses to take their medication on Thursday morning and they come to court acting differently, we can look at the log and see why. Or we can look and see, are there any gaps in medication that correlate with behaviors that we're concerned about? So it's really for our information, but you know, it's a good help for the family too, just to remember. And it's also a way for us to ensure that the families are not leaving the responsibility of the child's medications to the child. We want to make sure they're being monitored, they're taking them, they're swallowing them, that there's no pills being found in the couch cushions or anything like that, which happens on a regular basis. But we do random urine drug screens. And I'll just say, Judge Colbert is not a big drug screen judge. For those of you who have been involved with the court, you probably have seen that. She doesn't want to over criminalize, or if a child's positive for marijuana, she doesn't want to throw them in jail. But as far as the state guidelines go, our accountability court is required to provide urine drug screens, but only if there is a substance use diagnosis. So if we have a child who we know is using drugs that is probably going to affect the medications they're taking, we definitely want to screen, not to throw them in detention, but to make sure that those drugs are not interfering with their medications and see if we need to get them reevaluated. I would say marijuana is number 1 though. Most of our kids in juvenile court have at least used at some point. We do home inspections. It's not as intensive as the home inspections you would hear about through DFACS. We mainly we want to know the structure of the home. We want to know who lives there. Make sure all their needs are being met. We don't go through their trash or anything like that. But we do want to make sure that if there's anything they need, that at some point they're comfortable asking us for help. We are very excited that coming soon, we're going to have community policing, which will be very new to SPARC. All other programs in Chatham County have community policing, and they partner with the Sheriff's Department, and they actually go out and do home visits, check up on the people participating in the program. And we are now going to have that for SPARC. That should be starting in the next few weeks. So we're very excited about that. And Mr. Williams is really very excited about that. All right, so our phase 2, this is more when, all right, the newness has worn off. You should know the rules now. This is where we really get busy. So we implement what is called our master care plan. And this is, it basically is our treatment plan for SPARC. It's part of a court order, but it's more of a way to set short-term goals to get long-term results. So every week when you come to court, you will leave with a master care plan that is signed by the child and the parent that says, okay, this is what we're going to do before we come to court next time. We're going to make sure we take our meds every day. We're going to attend all of our appointments. Oh, I have a psychological evaluation scheduled for next week. I'm going to attend that. And it really just breaks it down for them to help it seem more manageable. So then we can check off our list what's already been completed to kind of help them see the end of the road at some point. We do have graduated sanctions for violations starting in phase 2. So what that means is every time a child commits the same violation, the sanction will grow. So we'll give you a chance at first. If a child does receive some sort of, let's say they destroyed, this is actually a true story, they destroyed their mom's staircase, pulled up boards all over the parent's staircase. So the damage to property was a pretty big deal. And at first, the mom did not want to press charges. So Mr. Williams gave a field sanction. Basically, he had to help fix what was damaged, and he had to help find what was damaged. The next time there was a violation, Mr. Williams put them in detention. Following that, if it happened again, that time in detention would double. We really try not to put our kids in detention, but sometimes it's really just to get their attention. We don't want them to get too used to it where it's not a big deal, but we also don't want to not use it if it's something that works for this kid. So those graduated sanctions typically start at a day, then they'll go to 7 days, then 14 days, then 21 days. You get the deal. But if it continues to happen, then we have a serious discussion about the child's ability to stay with our court program. So during this stage, they have court twice monthly. They also receive therapeutic incentives. So we're not just about punishment. We also want to incentivize every kid who comes through our program. So we try to find out initially, what do they like? What do you like to eat? What do you like to, where do you like to shop? We're big on gift cards because kids love to shop. So we try to personalize it depending on what they would like. Let's see, we try to implement pro-social activities, connect them to clubs, which again, with COVID, it's been really a big struggle. And we also do the urine drug screens as applicable. But during this treatment focused stage, we are having frequent contact with their service providers. We're trying to make sure that we're all on the same pages with the family. We have frequent check-ins. We want them to be able to call us and not just us calling them. So it's really a good time to form that relationship with the family as a whole. Phase 3, sustainability. This is where we're really hoping that treatment's going to kick in and we're going to start to pull back a little bit and maybe you guys won't need us anymore. So we have bi-monthly hearings, decreased face-to-face contact with the PO, compliance with service recommendations, and ongoing case management services. So my right hand in the SPARC program, her name is Brooke Donner. She has been with us for coming up on 2 years, but she is absolutely the backbone of SPARC. She is the person who keeps us all on target, and she reminds us of who's on the docket, reminds us of documentation. She's really great with the families. So she outreaches everybody every week to let them know, hey, you got a hearing, here's the link, make sure you call in or we're gonna call you. She really makes sure that that communication part is taken care of. She's fabulous. So phase 4 is our step down phase, which is really when we're trying to start letting go. We try to have very limited contact with the families. We want to make sure that their relapse prevention plan and discharge plan is completed so that, and this is something that's created by the child, not by us. This is something, it's a way for them to identify their own coping skills, to see what's going to help them when they have a crisis in the future, if they have a crisis in the future, who would they call if they ran out of meds, who would they call if they can't get an appointment, really just trying to put it in their hands so that they learn how to problem solve for their own mental health well-being. They will have, for the most part, our program, we keep our kids on house arrest. They have to have permission to go anywhere until phase 4, and then they can have a curfew at the parent's discretion. And of course, we want to make sure they're still taking their meds. We want to have so little contact in that last month that nobody has to contact us for anything. I mean, that's our goal, is for the parents to be able to problem solve, the kids can problem solve and no longer need us. What we don't want to do, and there's a fine line, we don't want to enable the families to depend so much on us that they can't problem solve in the future. So we do try to be cognizant of that. But then hopefully at the end of the road, they're going to graduate and move on to bigger and better. And we do have some kids who have been interested in starting an alumni program per se. So we need to talk a little more about that. But we have also Ms. Mathewson is looking for certified peer support youth who have lived experience with mental health and have made it through the program and may actually be able to help kids in the future. So we're looking for kids who are interested in that as well. So just our most recent update, Judge Roxanne Formey is officially our SPARC judge. Her first solo run was last week and it was great. We're really excited. This also means that we're reevaluating a lot of things just to see, you know, how we can update our policies and procedures, how we can partner with additional people in the community. She's very open-minded and she's very down with accountability courts. And actually she has some things in the works of her own to start another accountability court, which many of you may know, which is called HOPE. And it's for kids who have been commercially sexually exploited. So these are all some really interesting things that she's getting started and we're excited to have her. Of course, I'm the coordinator and clinician. Mr. Williams is our SPO. Brooke Donner is our mental health case manager. Having two Brooks, we just try to confuse everybody. It tends to happen. We have Maya Jinks, who's our educational advocate. Our defects liaison is Libby Letourneau. Our assistant district attorney is Brittany Paget. Public defender is Yolanda Bacharach. Bacharach by Judge Colbert, Bacharach by Judge Formey. She answers to either. Our guardian ad litem is Joe Huffman. Staff attorney is now J.P. Berlon, who is new to us as well. We're very excited to have him. And then Jess Mathewson. Added on to this team, we also have CASA involved. We also have defects involved. Melody Scott attends most of our staffings. And just to throw this out there, since I am speaking to CASA, we do have kids who have both a CASA and a guardian ad litem. The purpose of that is because the guardian ad litem, Mr. Huffman, is actually there on the delinquency side, and we are hoping to get the child off probation. And, you know, we don't want them to be dependent, but we don't want to keep them involved with the court if they're not needing to be involved with the court. So the CASA would be assigned so that he can kind of let go of the case and they can get off probation. So we have a couple of cases right now who are nearing the end of their probation and they are dependent. So we are assigning CASAs to kind of help with that transition. So these are our overall goals, is to help with making connections, and it could be with community-based agencies, getting them evaluations for things that otherwise they wouldn't be able to get. We have access to FFT and MST. For those of you who aren't familiar with those programs, those are part of our state incentive grant to help keep kids out of detention. It's in-home services to conduct family therapy, as well as to work with the other systems the child is involved in. We do have RAP services, which is usually through Viewpoint Help. We'll connect with community resources, pro-social activities, mentoring, alternative education programs. Some of you may be familiar with REP or with the different programs with DJJ. And then we try to connect them with job skills training, depending on where they are in their process. So, oh, I have Heather Gervaisi's name on here and I forgot to take her off, but it's just me. So that's just a general overview of our program. Certainly I could go very deep and keep you guys here forever, but I would never do that to you, I promise. But I'm open to taking any questions if anybody wants to ask anything.
Well, thank you. We had one come in and she was wondering, what are thought disorders?
Thought disorders can be anything. Usually it's, it goes along with psychosis. So it could be schizophrenia, anything that impairs their ability to be in reality. We do see some thought disorders. For example, schizoaffective disorder could be considered that, but it's primarily a mood disorder, but it still has that psychotic feature to it. So the thought disorders, typically we don't take them as being the primary diagnosis just because we're unable to engage them as easily. Those usually are going to start coming out around 18 to 21. We do have some that bud earlier, but we don't typically see those as often in juvenile court.
Okay, and a couple of people have started typing in questions. So one was, is there a wait list for participants?
As of right now, no, there is not. Right now, we have 12 participants involved in our court, and I did forget to say our current number. The only reason we are not at capacity right now is because of COVID. We've kind of put a hold on taking it, because it's hard to build rapport with somebody over a screen or over the phone, but also because of the transition with our judges. So we're trying to figure out how we want to configure new people coming in. But we do not have a wait list. We have a couple of slots. So if you have any recommendations, just you can email me at the email address on the screen.
Okay. And then what is the youngest age considered for intake?
Considered for intake in regular probation or through chins? I'm sorry?
I guess either.
Either. So the youngest that I've been aware of is 8. We actually had a staffing this past week scheduled with a child. It was a chins case for an 8-year-old. I don't think that they're going to keep it in the court, but really that's so young that punishing a child or putting sanctions on a child when they're that young and their brain is so underdeveloped is really not going to be effective. And if a child is under the age of 12, we typically do a competency evaluation through DBHTD to make sure that they're even able to understand the court process. And if they're not, that's when they're deemed incompetent. But I would say 8 is too young. 9 is probably the youngest that we would actually put somebody on probation. And again, only if they're competent.
Right. Okay. So someone was wondering, how does SPARC help with children that are trafficked?
That's a very good question. And actually, we don't have any who are currently involved in SPARC, but is really become a hot topic, especially with Judge Formey joining the team. So we do have kids who are at high risk of being trafficked or being exploited in some way. I can't say that we have a specific way that we are treating them in SPARC, but it's definitely something that needs to grow in this area. I know the awareness is growing, but the services need to grow, and we need to have some better options for where the kids can go rather than detention. So answer to your question is we're working on it, but we definitely need to bulk up our services.
Right. Well, I think the Hope Court will be a great way that those kids will get a lot of attention and services.
Absolutely.
So Nikisha was wondering, what is the protocol if a family relapses while they're in the final stage before graduation?
So we don't look at relapse as a failure. And that's one of the things we try to let the families know. Relapses in behavior happen. People stop taking their meds or they miss things. We don't expect them to be perfect. So we don't want to back them all the way up to put them in a different phase, because they will see that as a failure. What we may do is just put them on a pause so that we can try to get them regrouped and they can stay where they are without feeling like they're going to be in the program forever. So I hope that answers your question. We don't look at it as they need to go all the way back to the end, do not pass go. We just kind of deal with it as we are in the moment and then try to move them forward.
Okay. So that was one. How would you help kids who are homeless?
We have had some families who are homeless. We've had some families evicted while in the program. We try to connect them with community resources. Jess Matthewson has been instrumental in helping with some of that as well. She has actually funded hotel rooms while we're trying to get them placed with somebody. She's helped connect them with shelters. We try to make as many connections as possible so that all of the services aren't disrupted, because ultimately if they're homeless and they have to move out of county because they don't have a placement here, it's going to disrupt everything we've created as far as their support system in Chatham County. So when and also because we have Maya Jinks, she's our educational advocate. She has a strong connection with the homeless liaison from the school system to try to put services in place as well for the child. So we really outreach a lot of our community partners for that.
Yeah, that sounds like you kind of maybe know everyone in Savannah.
I wish. I try to meet the people who have funding.
You're a smart one. So Geneva has a question here, and there's a couple different parts to it. But during the treatment plan, have you discovered that a parent may have medical issues? And if yes, what is the protocol?
Well, I guess we usually discover if they have significant medical issues in the very beginning, because we try to ask if they have any barriers, but let's say that it's just something that comes up unexpectedly. We try to at least have that much communication with the families where they would tell us if there's any problems. Now, I will say if we have a family who, let's say the parent is, they just cannot come to court, they're in the hospital or unable to come on a regular basis, we try not to discharge them from the program. So we have had families where we just had to work with, maybe the aunt can bring the child to court 1 week, or maybe we can just go to them rather than them come to us. We try to make accommodations, however it's going to suit the family.
Awesome. Okay. And it looks like Bet has another question. Do you work with any other counties?
No, unfortunately, we're only in Chatham County. I have worked in different agencies with different counties, but right now I'm strictly Chatham. As far as the accountability court system goes, I do reach out to other counties we kind of share our policies and procedures so that we know how to deal with certain populations, such as CSEC, as these issues come up. So I do reach out to other counties for that reason, but we only take those in Chatham County into SPARC.
Okay. And I think we're actually right at 3 minutes till 3. But if anybody had any lingering questions, if you wanted to go ahead and put them in. And then if anybody else does, I just want to say thank you so much for all of this information. I mean, your PowerPoint was really great. And I think you presented it in a way that was like so easy and interesting. So thank you for taking the time.
Well, thank you for asking me. I am very open to questions. My contact information is on the screen. Feel free to call me if anybody wants additional information or has a youth in mind who may need our assistance. Feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Well, looks like nobody else submitted any questions, which means you did a great job of explaining everything.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate it. You'll have a great day.
You too. Thank you so much, Brooke.
Bye.
Bye.